Today's lesson is on the scientific method.
Welcome back, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mrs. Taylor, and I'm so excited that you decided to join me here today for this very special video. We are going to have a special guest join us today. They're going to help us introduce a new topic in science, the scientific method. Do you have any idea who that might be? Wow, those are some really good guesses. Well, without further ado, I would like to introduce to you my very special guest, Scientist Everett. Thank you so much, Mrs. Taylor, for having me on your show today. I love science. It is something that is so important to us in our everyday lives, no matter what our age is. It's important because we all have questions about things around us and how things work. And science and experiments are so important because they help us understand the world around us. I can't wait to share with you the steps to the scientific method. But before we get started, it's very important for us to talk about safety. Science can get really messy, especially when we start conducting experiments. So here are some things that you need to do to take precaution and keep you from getting hurt. Number one, we want to protect our eyes. Something might splash into our eyes if we're conducting an experiment that is messy. I have a pair of safety glasses that I'm going to wear today to protect my eyes while I do the experiment. Another thing that you might be able to wear as a student are safety goggles. That way your eye is protected all the way around. Another thing to do is to protect your clothes because something might splash on your clothes and stain them. I'm wearing this white lab coat so that it will protect my clothes.
The first step of the scientific method is to ask a question.
Let's begin by asking a question.
I wonder. The question that I'm going to ask in this experiment is what will happen if I put a raisin in water? Step 2 of the scientific method is to form a hypothesis. What do you think is going to happen during the experiment? A hypothesis is not a complete guess. It's something that's based on our prior knowledge, and it is also based on research. I've done a lot of STEM projects before where I have to decide if an object is going to sink or float when I put it in some kind of liquid. So I'm going to use that to base my hypothesis of what is going to happen. I'm going to say if I put raisins in water, then they're going to sink. I like to use the word if and then in my hypothesis so I can state what I'm going to do and what will happen. Now that we know what question we're going to answer during our experiment, and we have made a hypothesis showing what we think is going to happen, we're ready to begin our experiment. Before we begin, of course, we need to gather our materials. In order to complete today's experiment, we're going to need the following materials. We're going to need a clear cup so we can see what is going on during our experiment. We're going to need some water, and we're going to need some raisins. Now that we have our materials, we're ready for step 4 of the scientific method. We're going to experiment. Follow the procedures, which is a step-by-step set of directions that tells you how to conduct the experiment. Make sure to observe what happened. And as you observe, take some notes down in a science journal or maybe on a piece of paper so that you can remember what you see.
We have our materials here ready for our experiment. We have a glass of water in a clear container, and we also have some raisins. As we begin our experiment, make sure to put on some safety glasses so that you can protect your eyes in case something happens. Let's put 6 raisins into our glass of water and see what happens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And now observe. I can see a couple bubbles coming from the bottom to the top of the glass of water. But other than that, The raisins sank to the bottom, just as I said in my hypothesis.
During step 5 of the scientific method, you're going to find your results of the experiment. When you do this, you might notice patterns that happened during the experiment. You might also take the data and create a graph. To find the results of this experiment, I counted the amount of raisins that sank to the bottom. In this case, my results show that all 6 of the raisins sank to the bottom of the glass of water. Step 6 of the scientific method says to draw a conclusion. Take a look at your question again and how your hypothesis was worded. Were you right or were you wrong? As I look at the conclusion to my experiment, I decided that I was correct. The raisins will sink to the bottom in the water. Let's do one more experiment really quickly. Let's see what happens if we change the liquid. What if we use Sprite instead of water? Will something different happen?
I've gathered the materials for our second experiment. This time we're going to use the same clear glass. We're going to use the same brand of raisins. And the only thing that we're going to do differently is use a different liquid. Instead of using water this time, we're going to use Sprite. So first, open the Sprite. Pour it in your glass. Wait for the carbonation to go down so you can make sure that your liquid is the same amount as you had before with the water. And then we're going to put 6 raisins into the Sprite. I can't wait to see if something different happens. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Ooh, I already saw one go from the bottom to the top. 4, 5, 6. Oh, there's 2 at the top now. 3 at the top. Oop, there it goes back down. Wow, look at the raisins. It looks like they're dancing up and down in the Sprite. That's so cool. Let's take a closer look at what's happening inside of the cup of Sprite. Do you notice that when they go down to the bottom that they are collecting bubbles on the raisins? And those bubbles, as they collect on the raisins, is what causes it to dance and come back to the surface. There it goes. And as it hits the surface, it begins to make the bubbles pop. And so when the bubbles pop, it makes it go back down.
Here is what I typed up for the scientific method steps for the second experiment. Our question was, what will happen if I put a raisin in Sprite? Our hypothesis was, if I put raisins in a cup of Sprite, then they will sink. The materials I used were a clear cup, Sprite, and raisins. For the experiment, I put 6 raisins in Sprite. What's going to happen? And here's what I observed. At first, the raisins sink in the Sprite. Then the bubbles stick to the raisin, causing it to go to the top of the cup. When the bubbles pop, the raisin goes back down to the bottom until another bubble sticks to it. My results is where I counted how many raisins were moving. 4 raisins sank, and 2 of the raisins moved up and down in the glass. And finally, I drew a conclusion. I was half right. The raisins do sink, but some of them do move up and down too.
Thanks, Scientist Everett, for joining us today in the Science Lab. Thank you for reminding us of the steps to the scientific method so we can continue making new experiments as we explore the world around us, finding new questions to ask about the environment and the things that happen around us. If you like science and you'd like to learn more, click the like button and subscribe to our channel. If the numbers increased, I'll know that you want more science videos. Thanks so much for joining us today as we learned about the scientific method, and I look forward to seeing you on our next adventure soon. Goodbye.